Maybe you can talk more about, you said something about there comes a point when something in you no longer wants to forget or refuses to forget. So can you talk more about how that comes about, what happens inside?
There is a Greek god, I don't know if he's a god or not, but his name is Hephaestus. Apparently, he's a welder of sorts. Someone broke into a car wash. I mean, it happens all the time, but I remember this episode vividly some years ago because we had to call Amir. He was a welder in Sacramento. He had lost an eye. A spark had went into his eyes, and his eye made him blind in one eye. And oftentimes when he would come to the car wash, he would just take it out and show it to us.
No.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And the part of the coin box was stainless steel. You can't use regular welding material to weld stainless steel. You have to have this very special kind of, I don't know what they're called.
Soldering iron?
Yeah, soldering iron. And so he said, I'll come back tomorrow. I said, okay. So he comes back with all the, special tools, and he had also some stainless material with him, and he welds it. And he did it in such a way that you would think when you first saw it that this is the way this box was designed in the first place, And what your question really is that you have an experience, and this experience has a tendency of eventually becoming victim to forgetfulness. And once in a while, you have something that triggers you, where this particular file opens, and this particular kind of story is retrieved, and you talk about it amongst yourselves, about friends and family for 10, 15, 20 minutes. That's something I used to do with one of my friends. He was in such a bad shape because his physical life just didn't allow him to do what he wanted to do. So every time I got a chance, I would say, so can you tell me about that experience you had while you were sitting in the meeting? And then he would get teary-eyed, and all the difficulties in his physical life would disappear. And that's really all the power that he had, or I had, or anybody had. They could just give him create an environment where he would kind of sit in the shade for 10, 15, 20 minutes, remember what he had done when he was younger, and had all these really fantastic experiences. I don't know how. I mean, if you go back to the things we said about Malcolm and Martin and Jesus and Moses and Muhammad, what they really wanted to do, or Socrates, was to weld the art of reflection to people, so that before they make a step, they would first ask, examine, and then they would make the move, you know. I think what happens most often is that first you buy the car and then you lift the hood to see what kind of engine it has. And I think what Socrates wants to do is weld this particular craft, which is first, before you buy the car, open the hood, see the engine, make sure it's okay. Then, if it's good, then purchase it. You know the story of Gilgamesh much better than I. But there are a couple of scenes where Gilgamesh says, I want to be remembered. And what he's saying really is, I want to occupy a good amount of space inside people where they can't throw me out. I am welded to them. If the Greeks are right, only gods can do such a thing. Human beings can't do. Daughter of Fire is a good example that despite her faith in this man, despite her love for this man, he's unable to weld her for about 600-700 pages. What happens later on is interesting, that because you spend so much time with this man, he slowly begins to occupy so many different parts of you that you begin to think like him and see like him and smell like him. And that's how it happens. But first, welding it generates a lot of heat. It really just creates a good amount of burn inside you. It's painful. And Daughter of Fire is that. I don't know how true the story is, but they say that when the Buddha realized the Four Noble Truths, he had told one of his students or friends to take the teachings, dive down this river, and hide the teachings under this rock. And he said, I hope that eventually, the book just gets destroyed by natural elements. Just think for a moment, if the first noble truth, that life is suffering, if that was to be welded into your psyche, how could you survive life, Cassie? You have a daughter. There would be no joy in that. You have a husband. You're making all these plans. You want to make all these changes. And it really takes a very special kind of a person first to do the welding, and then another special person to embrace the welding, being welded. You know, my mom got married when she was 15 and a half. She hadn't even, she was 16. She comes from an environment where no man had ever talked to her. No man had ever had any physical contact with her. My father was, I think, 28 or so, 27, 28. My father is close to 90 now. That means they've been married for 60 years. And they've had a very good relationship. Eventually, life is going to unweld this relationship. Either my dad will pass first or my mom. But it has taken 60 years for this welding to take place, and it's strong. And it's not going to be unwelded easily. It has to be torn apart. Either my father has to die for this to happen, or my mom. And then the person who stays behind will be shattered to pieces. You know, even if you were to YouTube welding and just see some guy welding two pieces of metal together. I mean, these are two strange metals from various parts of this world. They come together. They like their independence. They each have an ego. They each have their own set of experiences. And this man says, no, I'm going to join you guys together. And all these sparks go flying up. And then they become unbreakable. You know. There is this scene in the book, I think it's called The Invisible Way, where Hamid says to Rashad that there is a woman, I forget her name. Do you remember her name?
No.
Noor, yeah. Which means light. And he says to Rashad that, you know, don't be around her too much. Leave her alone. Don't ask her questions. Apparently she had too many intense experiences without being ready. And so she was welded. The problem is this. If you put the welding tools to paper, it'll just burn and turn into ash. If you do it to wood, you know, it'll burn and have some dark spots, unless the whole thing kind of just goes up into flames and ultimately turns into ash. If you do it too much to metal, as we have done at the car wash, it creates a hole, inside the metal, and you can't use that particular part. If you use it to the right degree, then it sticks to the other metal. It's not enough to have the tools. You just have to make sure that you're not dealing with paper, you're not dealing with wood. And if you by chance find metal, you don't create so much heat where you destroy the metal.